So, thank you, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome Francis Bond. I've known Francis for a number of years. He's done a lot of work on Wordnets through the Open Multilingual Wordnet, which has collected a lot of the language efforts, as well as developing many Wordnets for many languages. And today he's going to talk to us about some of the work he's done for less resourced languages and developing Wordnets for less resourced languages like Kristang. So please, Francis, go ahead.
Okay, let me share my screen. Thanks for inviting me. And I- okay, so today I'm going to talk, as John said, about building word nets for languages with few resources. Um, and I should uh, say right from the beginning that this is not just my work. All of this is work done with members of my lab or done by members of my lab. I was not centrally involved in all of the projects. And of course, particularly with a small group of speakers, a lot of the work is done by the speakers of the language in building the resource. So I'd like to start off by thanking everyone, and I'll finish by thanking them. So I'm not quite sure how much I should say about WordNets to this audience because I suspect you all know, but I'll go fairly quickly through in case people online want to see this. Then talk about problems with low resource languages, 3 case studies: Abui, a language in Indonesia; Kristang, a language in mainly spoken in Malaysia and Singapore; and Cantonese, a language spoken all over the world, but yet much less resourced than Mandarin, for example. Then I'll sum up and finish, as I said, with thanking people. So here I'm going over stuff you probably know already. WordNet is a lexical database that organizes words into sets of synonyms. Generally, a synset represents a unique concept capturing different senses of the word. Synsets are connected by various semantic relations, and senses can also be linked by semantic relations. And WordNets have been used in linguistic research, natural language processing, artificial intelligence. Now they're also being used in education and language maintenance, which we'll talk a bit more about. So WordNet was originally developed for English at Princeton University, where it was designed as a model of human lexical memory. So trying to work out how humans store information, how we know about things being similar, dissimilar, what features they share, and so forth. But it was widely used by computational linguists and in natural language processing, and has influenced the development of lexical resources for many other languages. Currently, Princeton WordNet is no longer maintained, but it has a successor, the Open English WordNet, maintained by our host, John. So thanks for that, John, which you can think of as sort of Princeton WordNet plus plus, extended and revised. So the kind of relations we have are lexical semantic relations, like driver is a kind of operator, driver is the opposite of non-driver, driver means the same as a number one would, a golf club contains a club head. So this is all part of our knowledge of these words. We can also have some information about how word senses are linked. So a driver is someone who drives. We can have some information about how something is used. A driver, the second definition of driver, is used in the domain of computer science. And if we have the definitions, we can also get implicit relations. So driver is somehow connected to motor vehicle. Driver is connected to computers, communications, peripheral devices, and so forth. And we have many, many such relations. So over 30 relations are defined in the Global WordNet Association Wordnets, and every year we add a couple more as we try and model more things about language. Currently, I'm working on metaphor and metonymy, which we would like to add to Wordnet next year, I guess. Here's an example of what a synset looks like with some of the associated information. So you have an ID, you have a definition. So this is the English word tiger or Panthera tigris. The Japanese word would be tora or tora. And it has hyponyms. A Bengal tiger is a tiger cub is a tigress is a tiger. It's a member of the genus Panthera, and we link to external resources like the Sumo ontology. Originally, Wordnet had this information. Various people have added extra information. So people have added illustrations, people have added more grammatical information. So in Japanese, this is counted with a classifier hiki. So gradually people are making the Wordnet more rich in information and more useful for various tasks. The fundamental relation of links can be thought of as a graph, synset to nodes, semantic relations and edges. And this forms basically a tree, although in fact you can have multiple inheritance, so it's a directed acyclic graph. And going through this graph allows you to determine whether things are similar or not, find how things are related, and so forth. Wordnets have been used in many things. Originally studying word similarity, they're used to describe the meaning of texts when annotating it, used in word sense disambiguation. They've been used along with parsing to improve the quality of parsing. Wordnets were used in machine translation, less now with deep translation, but still for small languages, a Wordnet can be useful. People have used them to solve puzzles, tell jokes, distinguish the senses in word embeddings, so to understand what's going on in a learned model, for teaching language. And even now that we have large language models for some languages, they're useful as a check on quality. They're useful for explicit reasoning, useful for languages with insufficient language data, and for teaching where you don't want to be surprised by your language model. You want to have something you can trust. Wordnets exist for over 100 languages. Multilingual Wordnets link synsets across the different languages. As we saw with Tiger, we can say this concept is really the same in English as it is in Japanese. So the synset for tiger in English, the synset for tora in Japanese, the synset for harimau in Indonesian, all will be the same concept. This allows us to build new resources by going across the links. There's an organization of people, the Global Wordnet Association, who promote the development of these Wordnets. And for, I guess, the last 10 or so years, maybe 15 years, we've been running the Open Multilingual Wordnet, where we try and make it as easy as possible to link Wordnets together so that people can use them easily. But it's difficult to build a Wordnet. Developing Wordnets requires careful analysis. It can't really be fully automated. Word meaning can be culturally specific, which sort of requires careful consideration of exactly what something means. If you're building a Wordnet for a language that isn't well resourced, as we're talking about today, there may be no existing dictionaries. There may be very few corpora. So trying to work out what a word means in a language like this means talking to someone, asking them what it means, in a language you don't necessarily speak very well. Even for a language like English, we're still improving and expanding the Wordnet. Of course, this is true for every language. There's also an issue Okay, most Wordnets these days have been made open, but not all of them are. So you can't necessarily share or access the data you need some of the time. Okay, so as I said, I've been working on the Open Multilingual Wordnet, or OMW. It's a free multilingual lexical database linking Wordnets from many languages. It includes some of the most widely spoken language, like English, Spanish, and Chinese, but it also contains Wordnets for some quite small languages, as I'll talk about soon. These are downloadable. There are libraries for using them with various languages. You can use them with NLTK, you can use them with Python. The platform promotes collaborative development and data sharing across the different language communities, and we'll show how this was essential to building some of the Wordnets we've created. Part of the work I've done in these last 15 years is pushing open licenses for Wordnets. So trying to help people make their Wordnets more accessible for everyone. When we started back in 2008, we had a big free Wordnet for English. We had a medium-sized or perhaps small free Wordnet for Arabic. There were Wordnets available for research for Spanish and Chinese. And there were proprietary word and Italian and a few other languages. And then there were some Wordnets that basically you had to buy for Portuguese, for Indian languages, for French, and so forth. 15 years later, we're doing much, much better. So we now have open Wordnets for Portuguese, for at least 4 of the languages of South Africa, isiZulu, Xhosa, Zota, and so forth. Most of the European languages now have an open Wordnet. Not all, but we're very close. We're missing Belarus here. Most of the Asian languages, or major Asian languages, but still not all, have, when I say most of the Asian countries, their main language has a Wordnet. So this is good. We're happy about this. But this map shows the major language for each country. Indonesia has 700 living languages, 550 sort of native to there, to at least 150 originally from overseas, where people still speak it in Indonesia. Australia probably has around 300 languages, 100 indigenous languages, 200 languages from Europe, from Asia, from other places. I'm now living in Czechia, which is a fairly homogeneous Central European country. We still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 official minority languages, of which 2 of them do not yet have, 3 of them, I think, do not yet have open Wordnets. And that means if we want to make language resources for Vietnamese or Belarusian, we have to do more work than if we could start off with a Wordnet. So even though we're doing well in terms of having a language people can speak in Wordnet, we're still missing most of the world languages. A lot of Wordnets start off by exploiting existing resources, and that means basically bootstrapping off English. But many of the world's languages, probably most of the world's languages, don't have lexicons linked to English. They have lexicons linked to the dominant language where they are. And that's why it's, for building these new resources, it's so important to have a variety of Wordnets available. As I said, these small languages, and here I'm talking about languages like Abui or Kristang, lack lexical resources like dictionaries or corpora, or have very small dictionaries or corpora. So if we want to build something for this, we're basically cooperating with linguists working on the language, native speakers trying to document their own language, speakers of the language trying to keep the language alive, and building the dictionary together. This is very different from building the Wordnet for Japanese, where we have thousands of dictionaries for Japanese going back hundreds of years, linked to many languages. So building Japanese, we can do a lot of computational work to get 2/3 of the way. For many of these languages, you just can't do that. You need to start from much lower start. For a language like Abui, which is or Kristang, which is not normally written, or in fact Cantonese, the lack of standard orthographies also adds a problem. Two people's word lists may spell things completely different. A linguist whose native language is Dutch will write things differently from a linguist whose native language is Czech. And then when we try and combine the lists, we have these problems. So we have to do workshops, interviews, sort of manual documentation. You need a consultant from that language. You may need a consultant to help you speak to your consultant. We've typically, someone who's an expert on the language and someone who's an expert on a computer are not the same person. So if I have a community of 2,000 speakers of a language, maybe none of them are good with computers or want to spend time with computers. So you have to have someone working on the computational representation who doesn't necessarily understand the language. Even for very small speaker communities, they're often divided, and partly because they're small, there's strong differences between regions. So just as for a language like English, sorry, not just as, for a language like English, where we have a mass media that helps smooth out differences between dialect or region, if all of your speakers live in, half your speakers live in a village or a town in Malacca, half your speakers, or less than half your speakers live in Singapore, these are not going to be intermingling very much. The dialects can be quite different. If you don't have a standardized language, then people may disagree as to what is correct. One person might say it's this, another person will say it's that. We found this with Singaporean Sign Language. Some people would prefer signs based on Shanghainese, some people based on American, some people had their own homegrown things. Ultimately, the time and cost is what constrains how much data can be collected, but this is true for big languages. It's not only a problem for lesser resourced languages. When we start building a Wordnet, we almost always, as I said, bootstrap from existing Wordnets, and that is assuming that the structure of the language is the same, that a tiger in your language will be a tiger in my language. This is going to be true for many things, but not everything. And the further apart languages are culturally, the more likely there are to have these divergences in the conceptual reservoir of the language. So that means it's harder to build. You're not just mapping words onto existing concepts, you're trying to define the concepts to see how they relate to existing concepts and so forth. So to build a new Wordnet requires knowledge of the computing, knowledge of the language, expert knowledge of the language lexical semantics. Very rarely do we get all three of those in exactly the same person. And if we do, they're almost always a very busy person. And that tends to be the bottleneck. Tools and resources for building Wordnets. will not be localized into low resource languages, especially languages without a written interface. A bottleneck for our work on Abui is that the data collection is done by writing things down by hand, and then digitizing this data can only be done by a native speaker with a computer. There's one computer available to do this in Timor-Alor-Pantar. There's 2 or 3 people who use it, and they often have better things to do. It's not the problem, oh, I don't have a part of speech tagger. It's like a problem, we don't know what part of speech this language has. We don't know how to group them together. If you're trying to coordinate with people doing field work, often they won't have reliable power, internet, or the tools that you have access to. So it's hard. It's not like someone from in the field can immediately pull down a gigabyte of Python libraries to be able to do something. In general, there are also issues with some communities not wanting their language documented, either because of privacy reasons or trust things. Even if native speakers want to prioritize, want to do something with their language, they may not want to spend time building a Wordnet. They may want to do textbooks for children, for example, in which case they should be doing textbooks for children. The process of documenting for a language for Wordnet invariably introduces a little cultural bias. It's easier to map to concepts that you already have. So it's absolutely essential to collaborate with the local communities to make sure that the Wordnet is being built in a way that the local community is happy with, and in such a way that it is useful for them. So ethical considerations are really crucial, especially for endangered language communities. Even expensive published dictionaries contain errors. Something that's collected from native speakers who are not expert lexicographers will contain even more. So there's a lot of work in checking if something is surprising. It could be it's something surprising about that language. It could be someone has misrecorded it or misinterpreted it. Typically, you need to update and revise things as the language changes or as more data is collected and you find out more about it. For languages with no or little formal linguistic documentation, few or no collections of text, all of this is much, much harder. You can't say, oh, I'll look at 1,000 examples of this in a corpus. You may have 1 or 2 examples of this in your corpus, and that's it. Because of this, it's absolutely essential to involve the language community. They are the people who know what the words mean, who can see whether the concepts map or not, make sure that what you're recording is an accurate description of the language. Ideally, community members should be part of the digitizing and validating process, because if you don't do that, your Wordnet, just as any other linguistic resource, would not reflect the real linguistic and cultural landscape of that language. So the original Princeton Wordnet only covered content words, nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs in English. Because in English, you have many other dictionaries who cover more information. But if you're building a Wordnet for a language as part of a language documentation or part of revitalization, this may be the only lexicon for that language. Then you want to cover everything. You want pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions. Maybe you want usage notes, audio. You want to be able to record spelling variation. And you want the data to be as accessible as possible. So not just in a format that is useful for computational linguistics, but ideally available to the community, to field linguists, and to other researchers. And they will all want subtly different things. But I think by using a sort of common format like Wordnets, it makes it easier to preserve language data. You don't have to have a separate tool to read every language. It makes it easier to compare things. It makes it easier to build a single platform or a single export module that everyone can use. But it's a trade-off. For one language, there may be a special need. Maybe you want to spend more time working on that. But Wordnets are sort of, I feel, good middleware. They're something that we can adapt to different languages and preserve the linguistic heritage while use it for technological advances. Okay. So, okay. I should talk a little quicker, or maybe I'll go a little over time. We'll see. I'm going to talk about 3 case studies. So one is Abui. Abui is a Timor-Alor-Pantar language spoken by about 17,000 speakers in an area stretching from northern to the southern coast in Alor. Most of the field work done primarily by Franciszek Krachovil was in the village of Takelailang on the northern coast. And the Abui Wordnet was developed as part of a longer fieldwork project that started with Franciszek's PhD and is continuing today. Originally, data was stored in the SIL toolbox, a tool developed especially for field linguists. More data was collected in a way I'll tell you in a moment. We still have not finished digitizing all the data. As I said, the bottleneck is we need someone to actually type it in who understands the language. So Alor-Pantar is here. It's just above East Timor, where this blue arrow is. So this is Indonesia. This is Australia, somewhere in here. So Toolbox, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, has a very simple format where each record has a series of keys that are written with a slash and then normally a small abbreviation and their values. So you have a lemma, its pronunciation, its part of speech, and then possibly a gloss in various languages. So for Abui, Franciszek wrote a gloss in English, and then Indonesian and Malay, and then possibly example sentences, again, with glosses when possible. So Indonesian Malay is used because most of the speakers of this language also speak Indonesian or the so-called local Malay dialect. English is used in order to make it more accessible to researchers throughout the world. And Luis Morgado da Costa and Franciszek Krachovil took this data, compared it to the Malay Indonesian Wordnets, and said basically, if this sense appears in the same synset in all 3 languages, so if we have a synset that has split Pecha and Pecha in it, then it's almost always correct. So intersection in 3 languages has accuracy of almost 100, 2 languages around 50, 1 language around 35. Again, this is a similar method that's been used in many wordnets, including the Japanese wordnet. What was surprising here is that Malay and Indonesian are very similar languages. The Malay and Indonesian wordnets were built together in the same project using the same methodology, and still matching both of them does a lot better than matching one of them. So this wordnet was built using other wordnets. It would not have been able to automatically do any building unless we had the 3 wordnets available. But František is a very productive researcher. He wanted more words. The toolbox things was him collecting words as he documented the language in his PhD and beyond. We ran what we call I was at the first one, a rapid word collection workshop, where basically we bring speakers of the language together for 2 or 3 days and give them a sheet of paper with concepts in it. So we have something that says, we are going to talk about water. What general words refer to water? Water, H2O, moisture. What words describe something that belongs to water? And they fill in the word. What words describe something that water cannot pass through? And they fill in the words. We used Indonesian as the language they were looking at. So this form would have been in Indonesian. And the Summer Institute of Linguistics have these forms in a variety of languages: English, Spanish, Farsi, French, Hindi, Indonesian. I'm not sure what that is, Portuguese, Urdu, and Chinese. And that was great. So we had Indonesian there and can use it directly. 80 people got together. We got permission to use the local primary school during the summer holidays. And basically, every table had 3 people, and they would talk together. A younger person would help writing. Not everyone is literate. And we had groups of 3 so that people could agree on what a word meant or on what possible words we could do. And this got us a vast amount of data. As I said, more data than we are currently able to transliterate. We did, again, automatic mapping using triangulation of the, SIL concepts, these concepts to Wordnet synsets. But of course, these are much broader than Wordnet synsets. Watery, aquatic, amphibious is not a single concept. Waterproof and watertight may be a single concept. So we had a mapping, but very much not a one-to-one mapping. So we can say these words belong to one of these synsets, and still a human has to go through and check. As I said, data entry is the biggest bottleneck. Only a native speaker can really digitize it. There are only a handful who can, and they often have other things to do. Computational linguistic time is a bottleneck, linguist time. The people working on this, myself, Lewis, are not working on it as a currently funded project. It's something we do for fun or for supporting the research in the group we're in, but it often has to take second place to other tasks. There's a problem with orthographic variation. How we should write something is not fully decided for this language. František has come up with an orthography, but occasionally we will find things for which the orthography is not clear. And if we revise it, then it means everything we've done up till now has to be refined again. So you gradually get a better description, but your older documents become harder and harder to use. So the current release of the Abui Wordnet has 1,400 synsets and about 3,600 senses. A new version is on the way. It serves as a lexical resource both for linguistic research and for speakers in the local community. Native speakers are deeply involved in the project. Several of the people we worked with have gone on to do master's degrees in linguistics. Hopefully one of them will be doing a PhD soon. So they are learning the skills to document their own language. And this data is widely available. It's in the Open Multilingual Wordnet. You can even find it in Hugging Face. So now a language with 16,000 speakers, anyone who's interested in it can at least see some of the words. So I think this is a good example where we see how collaborative fieldwork is important. The linguistic resource we hope will be useful for Abui speakers, researchers, and educators. At the minimum, it helps preserve Abui by recording its lexical structure, some of the key cultural concepts. We think this can be a model for other Papuan and low-resource languages in similar contexts. As we said, Indonesia has 700 or so languages. Currently, we have Wordnets for less than 10 of them. And we see how we can combine model tools with documenting oral traditions, stories, and so forth. Speaking of which, we also translated a novel into, a short story into Abui, Bukuting Bikat Bikat, The Speckled Band, one of the Sherlock Holmes stories, which we've annotated in many languages with Wordnets. We translated this from Indonesian. One of Benny, one of our colleagues, did it because he enjoyed the story. It's the first short story translated into Abui, and we're now in the process of annotating it so that we will have a sense annotated corpus for this language. Okay, Kristang. Kristang is a critically endangered Creole language. It's spoken by Portuguese Eurasian communities in Malacca, which is in Malaysia near Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore. It's not clear exactly how many speakers there are. No one uses it as their main first language. There's probably 2,000 or 3,000 speakers, many more in Malacca than Singapore. It's originally derived from Malayan Portuguese when the Portuguese had a large colony in Malacca. Vocabulary is largely from Portuguese. Grammar is very close to Malay. Portuguese had colonies or settlements all over the world. And there's some influence on the Kristang in Malacca from other Portuguese Creoles, as well as from Dutch and English. So Malacca is here, Malacca and Singapore, the two places that still speak Kristang. There are other Portuguese Creoles scattered all over the place, quite a few in India, some in Macau, also some not shown here in Africa. Very recently, there's been a language revitalization effort, the Kodra Kristang, Awaken Kristang, with a goal of supporting the dwindling speaker base, maybe keeping the language alive. And Wordnet, in this case, was developed to help preserve the lexicon and support its transmission to younger generations. The project is led by local community members, many of whom are linguistic students. They run classes and workshops to teach Kristang using materials, some of which are derived from the Wordnet. Workshops have also been held to add new words to the Wordnet. So speakers of Kristang work together with the younger generations to create this lexicon. And this effort has been supported by local linguistics organizations and the government of Singapore, who's given some support. So here are people in a Koda Kristang class. So this is one of the speakers, and he's teaching some of the younger people how to do things. Some of you may recognize Luis Morgado da Costa, the main developer of the Kristang Wordnet here on the right. Kristang was not normally written. People would write in Portuguese or Malay. So to start the project, people looked for the very few paper dictionaries, word lists, including sort of personal collections. Linguistic publications about Kristang often have a short word list. There was a class taught at NUS on field methods who chose Kristang as their language for one semester. And then we now have these workshops for learning or developing more Kristang. Because there are so few speakers, probably less than 100 in Singapore, data collection and validation is difficult. The number of people who can do it are small, and they all have other things to do. The Kristang Wordnet definitely wanted to cover all of the language. Earlier research had already added pronouns, classifiers, exclamatives, and other parts of speech to Wordnet. So they took advantage of this and basically built the Wordnet with a two-layered structure. There's a core Wordnet where everything is a valid Wordnet linked to the structure of the open multilingual Wordnet. And then there's a sort of shallow extended Wordnet that just has Kristang English pairs. So someone can look up a word, and if all we know about it is its English translation, you can find that. If we know that it means this, it's linked to this concept, then you can look it up and look at links to Portuguese, to English, to Chinese, and other languages. So, as I said, this was designed to support efforts to reverse language shift in the Kristang speaking community. It's a nice example of collaboration between linguists and language communities. Again, we think it's a nice model for revitalization efforts, and shows how the development of the lexical resources build into the preservation and education. Okay, the final case study. I'm going a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but I'll finish this, maybe finish in 5-10 minutes. So Cantonese is spoken by millions of people, probably 80 million people, but again, it has almost no written tradition. Most people who speak Cantonese are bilingual in Mandarin, and it was normal for people to write in Mandarin Chinese. It's strange because it has quite a vibrant recorded tradition because of the Cantonese film industry. So you have Cantonese subtitles, you have Cantonese in films, you have Cantonese plays, Cantonese opera even, but not traditionally Cantonese novels, Cantonese newspapers, and so forth. Recently, people have started writing a little bit in Cantonese, but the amount of written text is still very small. So the Cantonese Word Project is trying to provide a lexical resource for this major Chinese variety. This should include everyday vocabulary, colloquialisms, and slang, because it is primarily a spoken language. Joanna Sio and Luis Morgado da Costa have been working on this for 5 years now, and the Cantonese Wordnet includes some examples. There's a small sense-tagged corpus, and it also has expanded the inventory of parts of speech to include aspect markers, a Chinese closed class part of speech. This is from the Chinese Atlas of Languages. I think a poor choice of colors, but these dark red is showing where Cantonese is spoken. Quite all over the world. You can see it here in Africa, New Zealand, Australia. It's also in Malaysia around Ipoh, across Thailand. Of course, it comes from here, from originally. There's Cantonese speaking communities in Hawaii, in Japan, and in England. So it's Cantonese people were seafarers. The language has spread all over the world. I first encountered Cantonese in Australia when I was a child. My best friend's parents were native Cantonese speakers. So, sorry, the Cantonese Wordnet, this would be incorporate spoken Cantonese with a lot of emphasis on trying not to be overly influenced by Mandarin. Almost all Cantonese speakers also speak Mandarin and switch freely between them. So sometimes it's very hard to find this boundary between the two languages. This is very recent research, not yet published. But one thing we noticed doing the Cantonese Wordnet was the variation in pronunciation. And there are some Cantonese words for which there is not a written form. Normally, Cantonese is written using Chinese characters, but Chinese characters are developed for Mandarin. So there are some words for which there is no suitable Chinese character. And people come up with various workarounds, including using Roman letters or writing a single sound with two Chinese characters. In order to help identify the sounds, we have added audio files to the Wordnet. As far as we know, this is the first project to add sound to a Wordnet. We recorded some data ourselves. Well, when I say we, a native speaker of Cantonese recorded this data. We harvested some data from Wikicommons. Here we found a common problem. Almost a third of the entries that were marked as being Cantonese were in fact Mandarin with a Cantonese pronunciation, not actual Cantonese. So it's important to accurately record Cantonese that we distinguish between these two things. Cantonese is a Chinese variety, so of course we have the standard problems of Chinese. Written Chinese doesn't show word boundaries. Cantonese isn't written very often. Linguists disagree on exactly what should be a word. So some things that were in Wikicommons, for example, we considered not to be words and chose not to put them in the dictionary. So here's an example of the experimental new Open Multi-Wordnet interface, where we show the Chinese character, transliteration, and then two possible pronunciations, ne and lei, with the fifth tone. I'm afraid my Cantonese is non-existent, so I can't pronounce them properly. Very soon you will be able to go online, click it, and hear this pronunciation. So Cantonese, because it has more resources than Abui or Kristang, is already bigger than Abui and Kristang. 6,000 concepts, 17,000 senses. We have recently added around 2,000 audio examples. And the goal is to preserve Cantonese as a separate linguistic entity from Mandarin. If you're doing work on loan words from Chinese, many words are borrowed not from Mandarin, but from Cantonese or Hokkien or Hakka or some of the other Chinese varieties. So it's a dictionary that includes this is useful for historical research. We think that we're hoping the Cantonese Wordnet will serve as a reference for the vocabulary of the language, maybe as a inspiration for linguistic resources for other non-Mandarin Chineses. It's part of the broader effort of documenting and preserving regional Chinese languages. And this is a very politically sensitive topic at the moment. The Chinese government, like many governments, vacillates between supporting regional languages and supporting Mandarin. Currently is perhaps supporting Mandarin more. Okay, so what are the summing up? We think Wordnets can help document and preserve linguistic data for endangered and undocumented languages. In particular, their strength is they enable cross-linguistic comparison by aligning Synset with Wordnets of other languages. Once you have the data in the structure of Wordnet, it's structured, searchable, easy to do things with. Wordnets can then be used to support language revitalization, to create educational materials. People have found in general that having an online presence boosts the social status of a language. A language dies when young people don't learn it. Young people are more likely to learn it if there's some online presence, as I said. Having more Wordnets allows us to build yet more Wordnets. More languages allows better bootstrapping. Phenomena covered in one language make it easier to do the next. The more data there is, the better our descriptions become. I think the biggest problem we have with the Wordnets at the moment is culturally significant concepts that are different from English or existing Wordnets haven't been added as much as they should be, again, because it's expensive. It's more than just adding a word to an existing definition. You have to come up with a definition. You have to link it to an existing concept and so forth. But I think this is important. This is what I'm working on at the moment with the Japanese Wordnet, trying to get the semantics of words that are not in Japanese, that are not in English, and link them through the collaborative interlingual index. Once we have that, then we'll have a permanent record of a language's lexicon, which will help in long-term preservation. We can then look at the unique cultural and cognitive world of speakers, but first we have to build it. For some languages, they are disappearing. If we can have the data in a Wordnet, it means we can at least still access it, even when there are no more speakers. But ideally, if there's a revitalization progress, we want to transmit the vocabulary to younger generations. I can skip that. Wordnets allow linguists to analyze and compare the lexical structure of different languages. Multilingual Wordnets facilitate cross-language research on polysemy, metaphor, lexical relations. I've used it to show how verb satellite languages are similar across Chinese, Japanese, and English. They can be used in typological studies. So with Khalil Rini, we built the Moroccan Arabic Wordnet, and then we could say how much of the vocabulary comes from Arabic, how much from French, how much from Italian, and get a better, how much from Berber, get a better idea of the state of the language. And as we build the lexicons with more language-specific information, we hope to be able to look more at categorization and conceptualization. Okay, so thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Thanks to John and the Teanga project for inviting me. As I said, this work is work done in cooperation with people, or Kristang, primarily by other people. So I'd like to thank Luis, František, and Joanna. And I should point out that I talked about the Wordnets that I know about, but there are many other Wordnets for low-resource languages. Amharic, Kurdish, Mansi, Moroccan Arabic, Sardinian, ASL, Uzbek, Welsh, Irish Gaelic. There are even people working on Wordnets for ancient languages, ancient Greek, Coptic, Latin, Qin Chinese, Sanskrit. I didn't have enough time to cover everything, but I don't want you to feel that this is the only work that has been done. Okay, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please ask.
Okay, thank you, Francis. That's a fascinating presentation. Do we have any questions from anybody?
Yes, please. I do have a question. My name is Ineke Scheurman from Belgium.
Hi, Ineke.
And yeah, I'm doing a little bit difficult because we are not working on a spoken or a written language, we are working on sign languages.
Right.
Yeah, and we want to connect them also with Wordnet. But for example, in a sign language, there is a huge difference in they are a little bit iconic, these signs. Just when you attach a painting to a wall, it will be a vertical movement. When you attach a trailer to a car, it's a horizontal movement. Yeah. For
Yeah.
example, in English, that difference is not made. It's a one and the same word that is being used. But I can imagine that there are other languages, also spoken languages, etc., that make this self kind of difference. How can you find them? How to, yeah.
So
So do you understand what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, I understand what you mean. I think it's a real problem
Okay. Yeah.
because sign languages use a different modality.
Yeah. Okay.
They take advantage of it.
Yeah.
So the same with like indexicality. I can talk about someone and I can move
Yeah.
them as part of the thing. So sort of like how classifiers are used, but more dynamic. How we would find them is to take advantage of the hierarchical structure of WordNet. So if there are languages that specialize attach into different ways, you can look at the concept in the interlingual index for attach and see if it has any hypernyms in any language.
Hmm. Yeah. I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
As I said, we even if it's in a language for which we have a WordNet, it may not yet be
Yeah.
entered. And of the few languages I speak, I don't know any that make that distinction. So that's the sad thing with a negative result. You don't know if it's because it doesn't exist or if
Yeah.
the WordNets just don't
Okay.
cover it.
Okay. We were trying it that way, so you do not say, there's another way to do that. Yeah.
Sadly, no.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good. Are there some other questions? Well, maybe I'll ask a question that is, I say, perhaps kind of obvious. So, with the rise of large language models, and there's a lot of applications of people trying to use large language models to support endangered languages and to help with things like you mentioned, data entry is a big challenge, and automating that to some degree is something where these kind of modern technology, kind of new technologies of language models can help. So, how do you kind of foresee WordNets going forwards in the era of large language models?
So I can see it a couple of ways it going. One is people could say we're not going to do WordNets anymore.
I hope not.
Yeah. We experimented with using a WordNet, large language model to build Singlish entries for a lexicon, not a WordNet yet. And what we found was, as I think other people have found for similar, who have tried, it helps for some percentage of things and is plausibly wrong for some percentage of things. And there's a phenomenon people called automation blindness, I think, that if you have a human in the loop, so the computer produces something and the human checks it, if the computer's too good, it becomes useless because the person checking just clicks yes every time. So I fear that for some languages, the large language model is at that stage. So if I tell it to build me definitions for English, maybe it's going to be perfectly right for 99 out of 100 and plausibly wrong for the other one. And I won't know which one it is because you can't carefully read 100. People just don't do it. It's an established thing. We found for Singlish at least, it saved us time. So there are enough wrong ones that we were finding them. And it would do everything. It would give us a part of speech, it would give us an example, it would give us the thing. So even if someone just said yes, no, yes, no, yes, no to each subcomponent, and then a human fixed the subcomponents, it was quicker than typing it by hand or looking up the bits by hand. So I think we feel it was helping, but it could not replace a person. For very low resource languages like Faroe, I think, Faroese, maybe, language spoken in the Faroe Islands, what we found is it will produce Danish. So Faroese is very close to Danish. There is so much more Danish data on the web than Faroese that it will get something close. So it's not very useful in this case. So I think there's no one answer. And for a language like Abui, for which there is, I don't know, 30 A4 pages of written Abui, the large language model will not be helpful at all.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions? Good. So in that case, I'd like to thank our speaker again. So that's a great talk, Francis. And
Good, thank you.
the next seminar, we haven't got one planned up yet, but we'll have one coming soon, probably early next year. So thank you.